Greetings, Guardians. My name is Bife here. Sometimes there is no happy ending to the story. Much as we might hope for something different, much as we might try to change the circumstances, much as we might struggle against fate, sometimes there's nothing we can really do. Such is the case with the story of Amanda Holliday by the end of the Season of Defiance. If you're watching this video, we'll be going over the events of this week, but also talking a little bit about the Season of Defiance generally. First of all, I think it's fair to say that if you haven't played last week's story or this week's story, go play them both. This week is, needless to say, taking on the sudden aftermath of the death of Amanda Holliday. Everyone has moved from the shock of what happened and has started to grieve. Devrim, Mara, Zavala, and Crow are all going through this in a different way. First, we have Devrim, whose experience is best summarized by the hard task of continuing to live day by day.
Guardian. I woke up this morning and looked out across the grey mists of Trostland, and I've got to tell you, my heart just wasn't in it. I didn't want justice or revenge. It wouldn't bring her back. I felt tired. I didn't want to fight anymore. But then, out in the distance, I spotted a deployment of Shadow Legion moving through the fog, pushing a group of prisoners before them. It's not about me. It's about them. So I picked up my rifle and I got to work. We've got to fight on. Not just because we're in the Vanguard or Queen's Guard or because we're heroes or all that rot. Because it's what Amanda would have done. And that's good enough for me.
In a certain way, this has to be something familiar to Devrim. He's lived a long life, it seems, and even if one only accounts for his time in the Red War and the invasion of the Shadow Legion more recently, there's no way that he hasn't seen at least a few people pass away. He puts himself in mortal danger every day and has done so for years. If nothing else, the process of his grief isn't so much over, but it feels as though he's had plenty of practice with it. Having a grasp of his own mortality perhaps has helped with the process as well. I also say this because of the contrast with another person who should be very familiar with the process of grief, but perhaps is not so familiar with the feeling of mortal danger and the acknowledgement that his time will come at some point as well. I'm talking, of course, about Zavala. Where Devrim has found resolve that lets him push forward, Zavala feels as though he's on the edge of giving up.
We've all died countless deaths. But we still only feel loss from the outside in. Holliday. She died doing what was necessary to protect the people of the city. She didn't do it out of obligation or circumstance. She knew it had to be done. And she believed in it to the end. She had one life. And she used it to save us. She set an example for us all. I don't know what else to say. Amanda. I would give my last life, if it would bring her back. I've begged before. It's a false hope. A lie. At every loss, the traveler is silent. Each path I take leads me to a grave. Cade. Sophia. Hakim. I failed them all. I love you, Amanda. I am so proud of you. Forgive me.
last time I said anything about Zavala, I said that he might be the pillar to pull us all together. I see now that I was wrong in my assessment. In spite of all the grief that he's endured, in spite of all the loved ones that he's watched die, I feel like this is finally the straw that's broken the camel's back. I think the thing about this that clearly has to hurt the most is that once again, the icon in which Zavala placed his faith has failed him. The Traveler has remained silent. Regardless of its state of being, regardless of its grievous wounds that it suffered at the hands of the Witness, Zavala in particular in this moment has a point to be made. He's been watching since the Dark Age as the Traveler has continued to remain silent. He watched as it first resurrected warlords that were cruel to humanity. He watched as it refused to grant mercy to those in need in desperate times. He watched as it allowed Gaul and the Red Legion to silence and shackle it, only for it to break away after victory had been hard fought for and had cost them much. He watched as his family died around him generation after generation and was powerless to stop their passing. And he watched as the Traveler gave the light to the mortal enemies of the Guardians, the Hive. Amanda was perhaps the final straw. Zavala had known her since she was a girl, and it's likely that she was like a daughter or a sister to him. He loved her as we all love our family because that's what they were, part of the same big family. In particular, all of this makes me fear for what Zavala might do next. Crow was quick to anger and is scouting for revenge against those who killed Amanda, but Zavala's grief is taking on an entirely different guise. He's rejected everything that he used to believe in, and now I think it'd be fair to say that he has almost nothing left. Us, Ikora, Shaxx, Crow. His list of remaining friends grows thin. The thinner it grows, the less he has to lose. I fear for what his next move will be. I fear that his words to Eris Morn will be somewhat hauntingly prophetic.
And Eris, I think you know better than anyone that darkness is not a path to be forged alone.
She wasn't alone. Though I take your point.
If Zavala does walk the path of darkness alone, I fear for what he may find. Then come the words of Mara Sov, who was more reserved than any others, just as usual, but even she was beginning to see that it would be a failure not to openly grieve, and to allow for time of mourning. Millions of years and thousands of dead by her side and at her hand, and now, only in this moment does she begin to understand what it is to grieve openly, and to allow the weakness that she would otherwise have perceived this to be, to exist. Because it's not weakness, it's reliance. But that doesn't necessarily have to be weakness. Interdependence is something that can bring strength, and together we are always stronger.
One cannot hear Zavala's words and remain unmoved. That man has borne suffering enough for many lifetimes. That is the price we pay for opening our hearts. And as the voice in the darkness extends its reach, we know only that few will finish this journey with us, for the path is long. As the nebulae whirl and billow above us, we remain. We endure. This is our privilege, our duty, and our curse. Take heart, Guardian. Know that we will endure together.
Finally, we heard once more from Crow. He's been away, alone, searching for an enemy that he can fight to avenge Amanda. He hasn't had time to grieve, he hasn't given it to himself, but for just a brief, compassionate moment, his sibling can give him the time and space, and the place to grieve.
Crow,
What do you want?
I wish to speak with you.
I don't have time for this. Or for you.
We've all lost someone dear to us.
If you mean me, you don't show it.
I wanted to. But I held my heart so closely that I smothered it. I don't want to see you do the same.
You don't know me. Stop talking like you do.
I know how we grieve. It is raw and violent. I know we believe that keeping others away from it will protect them. But we don't do it to protect them. We do it to protect ourselves. We do it because it is easy.
Nothing about this is easy. You didn't know her.
Then tell me who she was.
She was a sunrise.
Grieve its setting, but do not turn your grief to armor. Let us bear you through it.
I'll try.
I know you will.
And aside from one radio conversation that we'll be getting at some point later down the line, that is the end of the Season of Defiance. A season where, much like in Lightfall, we lose. I think that there are some who are going to feel disappointed that we didn't get to avenge Amanda, and that we didn't get a big story conclusion. Yeah, sure, there's still time for all of that in a seasonal finale if that does occur, but I don't think one is coming, and our revenge, even if that was to occur, would not be arriving on the swift wings of justice. That's just going to be disappointing to some people, and while there are aspects within the Season of Defiance that are disappointing for all of their own different reasons, I wonder with this particular point if that isn't actually just the point of it all. We're in a fight for our lives. In such a war, death will always be sudden, it will always leave us confused, and it will always be senseless. We'll rail against it and almost believe for a second that it can't have happened, that this must be a trick of the light. It doesn't change the fact that it has. This feels like a low moment for Destiny, and at least to a certain extent, I think that that is indeed the point. We've been left in a position of weakness, but Devrim's original message from this week still rings true. We are here regardless, continuing to defy the Witness and its forces in spite of the pain. I think that perhaps with this lone aspect of the story, this is how we're supposed to feel. Disappointment is perhaps a shadow of bitterness that it's supposed to leave us with. As for certain other aspects of this season's story, I think that there are some bits and pieces that absolutely need to be levied as critique, which can't necessarily be passed over with the narrative and what it's meant to make you feel in mind. Whilst there may have been a point narratively speaking to watching Crow hunt for an enemy that might not be there, I think we need to remember that there are many unanswered questions left from this season. Who is leading the Shadow Legion in Callus's absence? What was their purpose in capturing the Elixni and human refugees? Why are they building these pyramid complexes on Earth? We've seen no part in the main narrative to answer these questions, and whilst the season is always meant to be shorter in these first seasons that are attached to major expansions, none of these questions were answered, and that's frustrating, because at the end of the day, it does then feel a little bit more meaningless. I hope that they do eventually pick up on the reason for all of this, otherwise it will seem even more meaningless when we sit and think about why Amanda saved those people. Yes, they were being held captive by the Shadow Legion, but we still don't know why. For all we know, there was no concrete reason. It was merely the ploy of control. If it was utterly pointless, and if there was no grander scheme behind it, then it does make it feel as though Amanda kind of died for nothing. Why are we here? That's the question that I think we should be answering in the narrative, and I think it's the one that we should also be asking as players, not just from the sake of how does the narrative make us feel, because again, I feel like that's the objective, but I do also feel as though there are certain points to this plot where it just felt as though the death was a lot more meaningless because of these points. I've already made a lot of analysis of Lightfall and a lot of critique. I don't think I need to make a lot here for Season of Defiance. I don't want to. I think all I'll say is I hope that all of these questions get answered either by the end of the season or well into the Season of the Deep. Regardless, that is all from me for today, and that is mostly it for the story of the Season of Defiance. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, go ahead and leave a like, and if you have your own thoughts, leave them down below in the comments section. Of course, if you have any more desire to watch Destiny lore content, go ahead and hit subscribe, and the bell next to subscribe to turn on those email notifications. But as per usual, know that your viewership, as always, is quite enough for me. And that in the meantime, my name is Byf. Rodacia ad Astra. I'll see you, Starside.